Hey guys, what's up? It's Phoebe from Alternative Twist Radio. I'm going to be doing a reading of Chapter 14 of Rising Up by Tanya Ross. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 14, Xander's Exile. Xander faced a magistrate. His black robes defined a broad man with a beady stare and straight ebony hair that reached his shoulders. This man, then, was the cherished and revered leader of tranquility, the one every citizen worshipped. Xander Noble. Yes, Your Majesty, Xander gazed back defiantly. Your alt has shown over 1,000 negativity registers on the continuum. The magistrate creased his hawkish face with a frown and shuffled some papers in front of him. I guess that would be correct. I understand that all efforts to rehabilitate you have failed. Yeah? Who the freak cares? Not like you do, our great kind-hearted leader. Since this is the case, and you have since violated our contractual agreement, we now decline your citizenship in tranquility. Well, that's a big sacrifice, Xander said with a dramatic sarcasm. You can bring me down, you can throw me out, but I'll never give up my freaking identity. He looked around, pretty sure he could make it to the door again if he tried before someone could catch him. Have you anything to say that would excuse your behavior as a citizen of tranquility? No, only this. I'm strong enough to survive. You won't see me begging to be one of your brainwashed citizens. The magistrate narrowed his eyes, which were dark as pitch. Very well. In keeping with the law, you are being given your wish. He smirked. You are hereby stripped of your citizenship and your family name and classified as a REM. The acronym defines you as resisting emotional management. Most unfortunate. You no longer have access to the city or to any of its benefits. Your family will not acknowledge your existence, including your past. You are hereby erased from society, exiled to the outside. He waved a vain hand in dismissal. The Socius will take care of you from here. The red-clad Socius did not speak, but with a burst of energy, took deliberate, exaggerated, hurried steps to the front of the judge's bench. He handed Xander a pile of what looked to be thin fabric, charcoal gray. The Socius asserted, your REM clothes. Xander snatched a rough, bland apparel. You expect me to wear this? Xander replied, holding it up to the light. Not my style, he joked. The Socius boomed. Put on your clothes! Xander stood, his stance mullish. When he didn't immediately show even a flicker of movement, the Socius took control, stripping off Xander's flamboyant clothes and shoes. This is the definition of humiliation. His arms reflexively covered his naked body, a sense of vertigo threatening to throw him off balance. He swallowed rapidly, wishing he could just disappear. At last, Xander jerked his arms and head through the short-sleeved shirt and his legs through the shorts like an angry robot. He was dressed. Then, hustling toward him, the Socius captured him by the arms and shoved. There was no happiness campaign here. His time was up. Across the room, a screen went up. Xander saw heavy red curtains monogrammed with the monumental T on each side. As he had no choice but to slide along with his persecutor, he stumbled, off balance, towards the curtains. Xander watched a weighty curtain draw up, as if the next stage of his life was being unveiled. There was no getting out of this. Xander shifted his weight into a more threatening position. He growled in frustration, a deep guttural sound. The Socius, unflappable and eerily calm, unlocked a ponderous scarlet door before them with a large, old-fashioned golden skeleton key from his pocket and pulled it open. He threw a thumb out, gesturing to Xander to move on into what looked like to be a simple hallway. Xander crossed his arms and shook his head from side to side as if he had an actual choice in a firm no. Finally, Dissocius gave Xander a brutal shove where he stumbled like a disorderly drunk into the coldness of the corridor. You'll find no happiness or peace now, Rem. The door shut behind him finally, and he heard the lock screech. He winced as it thudded into place. Xander found himself in a hallway. Cement floor and brick walls in gray surrounded him, unwelcoming as a morgue. He immediately felt like a lost soul. His eyes darted up and down, checking out any options he might have. He could see that the hallway stretched ahead until at some point it took a sharp turn, obscuring it from sight. His bravery suddenly evaporating, Xander hesitated, but there was nowhere to go but forward. He cursed under his breath. A bead of sweat ran into his eye where it burned like acid. He wiped the sour-smelling sweat off his brow with his arm. Straightening his embarrassing clothes, frustrated that they were already riding up his crotch, he yelled, "Frack!" And with that, he started his pace into the unknown. The gray, brick-lined tunnel was punctuated every 20 feet by undersized, flickering light bulbs that threatened to wink out. Not great lighting, but at least he could see. Xander relaxed a bit as he realized the tunnel just looked industrial, not menacing. I already know my fate is set, he thought. I am a Rem. There's no going back. But maybe, even for me, I'm being overly negative. His thoughts somehow restoring his spirits, Xander traveled a distance of 100 feet before he realized that with each step, the lighting became dimmer and the hallway became colder. It might as well be a tomb. There was no sounds, no creature stirring. The smell, though, was another story. Nothing that he had noticed at first. Xander sensed somehow the tunnel reeked of age and neglect. He inhaled the moldy smell and coughed. The kicker, though, was the cold. Xander was not used to this kind of climate. The rigid air gripped him, forcing his teeth to chatter, especially dressed as he was in his issued clothing of a thin t-shirt and shorts. Stripped of his shoes, the concrete floor sucked the very life out of his feet. Little by little, the lights on, which he had depended on, winked out and disappeared. Finally, it was dark as pitch. He threw his arms out in front of him and then shuffled over to the wall to his left, where he had at least some sort of support. Feeling his way along the walls, Xander hoped for anything that would give him answers. Would there be an end sometime soon? And what would he find at the end of the tunnel when it dumped him to the outside? In the inkiness surrounding him, Xander imagined stars, but he had never been good at the visualization technique, and now he understood that. Regardless, this present reality could not be altered with his mind. Step, step, step. Each step, each breath, a sentence, an obvious punishment. Darkness swallowed him up little by little as he took curves and slopes leading him downward into mystery. He began to lose track of time. How long had he now been walking? Probably miles. At least a couple of hours. Who knew? He trudged along, his progress slow but steady. He stopped, sensing a new odor. Among the smell of decay, Xander detected the scent of smoke. Why smoke? Was there a fire? A fleeting thought. Would his parents even miss him? He had broken ties with them long ago after they politely asked him to move out of the house. He was a disgrace, even to them. He imagined they'd just be glad to hear he got what he deserved. Xander knew that he had reached his limits. He was by now exhausted, thirsty, and confused. He still felt the cold grabbing his body with ghostly fingers. Cold, so cold. Suddenly, he bumped into a wall. The wall was deep freeze cold as well, but when he ran his fingers over it, he found that a primitive metal door handle protruded into space. Still having no glimmer of light, Xander grabbed a hold of the doorknob. In spite of himself, he prayed. To whom or what, he did not know. Xander turned the knob and pushed himself with all his weight into the heavy door. It was stuck, as if rusted into place or warped by the dampness. Finally, after pushing with all of his might, pressing himself onto the door handle, it opened with a groan. He stepped through. The tunnel, with its twists and turns, its long path, deposited him into what? His eyes revealed a whole new view. Hot. The sky was gray, and he stepped out onto a sparse, parched brown grass. After being in a deep freeze, the air, scorching and dry, was akin to a dragon's breath. Just a minute ago he had been freezing, but now, already, he began to sweat. Even the air was suffocating. It hurt to breathe. His eyes scanned the arid landscape. All he could see was a parched, flat earth. There was no sign of any life anywhere. He had no hints of where to go, which direction even. He would have to launch a discovery tour. Damn it, what choices do I have now? With nothing recognizable as far as he could see, Xander quickly made up his mind. His remark to the judge about being able to survive would have to prove accurate. His life depended on it. Xander stood against the outer side of the tunnel's walls and slid down it warily. He sat, both to rest and to reflect on what he was going to do. He gazed across the landscape. A plume of diffused gray smoke in the distance snaked its way up to the heavens. He felt a seductive-like heaviness descend on him. Xander woke up, startled. Something was running down his leg. He shook himself to fully wake and shake off what he thought might be a spider crawling up his calf. Arriving at a fuller consciousness, he realized what he felt was a rivulet of sweat. Then the crushing memory came back. The outside. He was sunburned and sticky, blurry and confused. He scratched his back and stomach. His ugly clothes were wrinkled and prickled his skin. With a grunt, he pushed himself to his feet, realizing that his clothing was the last of his problems. So thirsty. His mouth was a shriveled fissure. He would have to start looking for a way to find food, water, and maybe other realms. Would he find others like himself somewhere in the vast landscape? Or was the outside a death sentence? With an earnest sigh, he propelled himself toward the wilderness before him. Water, food, and people in that order, he determined. It was going to be a challenge. He had no sense of direction, but the sense of time and his blistered, aching feet told him he had been walking for a few hours. He had discovered nothing to suggest that he would even survive a day or two out of the city. The trek had been long, and Xander was sighed with discouragement. The air of just the place still weighed heavily on his lungs. Just when he was ready to break down in frustration, he saw in the distance what looked like to be a small copse of trees. At least those would offer him some shade for a time, and if they were growing there, some way to find water nearby. 10 minutes later, he arrived. To his dismay, the trees, anorexic at best, were partially cut, obviously for wood at some point in time, or more or less dead. Someone had been there, but now no one was around. He was still alone. Except for the faint smell of smoke in the air, the surroundings offered no shred of humanity or animal life. He sank down on a section of cut tree to rest, sagging against a shredded form. Putting his head in his hands, he stared off into space. He couldn't go another step. This was the best place for him to make camp. It would have to do for today. At least he wasn't dead yet, he rationalized. He would prevail. At that, a joke that he'd heard pushed his way into his thoughts. Never knock on death's door. Ring the bell and run. He hates that. Xander chuckled. Yes, he would indeed have to be running. He bent down and picked up a couple of sticks, one of them about 3 feet long, the other about a foot. He could use them to start a fire if he found food. No need for warmth. The sun, while lower in the sky, was unrelenting. Suddenly, a tiny movement captured his attention. A lizard, about 6 inches long, was watching him from a nearby rock. Dinner, he thought. The lizard cocked its head, blinking with its bright, beady eyes, content to bask in the sun. Xander inched his way closer, never making eye contact with his intended meal. He realized that he was close enough that he could bash the lizard with one of his sticks. He stood perfectly still, measuring the distance with his eyes. Finally, he let his stick fly. Thwack! He would stay alive another day. Rising Up by Tanya Ross is available on Amazon.com.